Well, the wait is over. The Trump administration has released 80,000 files related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. James DiEugenio is considered one of the best writers and researchers in America on JFK's assassination. He's written multiple books on the subject, including co-author of The JFK Assassination Chokeholds, that prove there was a conspiracy. And he joins us now on Power Hour. James, thank you for your time. I want to get into some of the key takeouts from the files in a moment. But first of all, what's your assessment of the files? Did you get the answers that you were hoping you would?
Well, let's. There were so far 64,000 pages that were declassified as of yesterday, late in the day. Now, obviously, no human being could read that many pages
Mm.
in 24 hours. Okay, it's patently impossible. Okay, in fact, no five people could. But let me say this, Gabriella. There's some very interesting stuff, in the pages that I did manage to read. All right. One of the things that I think you wanted to talk about was this whole Australian connection, which took a long, long, long time to be declassified. Evidently, there was a source through uh, the embassy in Canberra
Mm.
that on November 23rd said that somehow the Eastern Bloc countries were behind the Kennedy assassination, and the chief of Australian intelligence did not want this declassified, so he wrote a letter to Richard Helms, the director of the CIA, in 1968. All right, and Helms said that they had scoped this out already, and they did not think that it was credible, that the source was credible, and so they were not going to agree to have it declassified either at that time. And it wasn't. It wasn't. Commission document 971 was not declassified for a very, very long time. All right. I think it wasn't declassified till the time of the review board. Okay. In the 1990s. All right. So that's one very interesting aspect.
It
There's
is
another one that I
interesting.
think you
Just
wanted me to talk about.
yes, but
Uh,
let's stay on this one for now if we can. As you mentioned, it involves ASIO, which made the request to keep that document from the Warren Commission a secret. And when US authorities responded to ASIO's request, they said there is every reason to keep the document out of the public domain. That's certainly raising some eyebrows.
yes. Yeah. You know, if they didn't consider it credible, which neither Helms nor your intelligence service considered it credible, why was it so important, okay, for it to be kept out of the record? You know, and it turned out that the source for this information, had a very checkered past and had said something like, the Russians had sunk an American atomic sub, in 1962, which of course turned out not to be accurate. All right. So to be perfectly frank, I've been studying this for the last couple of days, and I have no idea what was so important about keeping it classified. It's one of these things that I think actually makes the CIA and these other intelligence services look worse by keeping something like this classified for so long. I think
Mm.
it was a very bad mistake on their part.
It's interesting. The door is not completely shut to new insights, but going through the documents that we have so far, it doesn't appear to suggest that there is a second shooter, which Anna Paulina Luna claimed that she believed that there was after going through the files. Is there something I'm missing, or what's your read?
Well, like I said, I haven't been able to go through the large amount yet, but the information that we do have, for example, something that was declassified, is that the the Russians had 5 volumes of intelligence on Oswald when he was in the then Soviet Union. You know, and they had come to the conclusion through an informant that they had inside the KGB. That Oswald was not trying to be a a Russian spy or anything like that. You know, that he might have been a mole sent over. Now, whatever happened to those 5 volumes that the Russians had on Oswald is a mystery because it's never surfaced anywhere. All right. Uh, Now, another very interesting thing, which I think you wanted me to talk about,
Yes,
was Charlie Kirk and Gary Underhill. Did you want to talk about that?
absolutely. This is going a bit viral. The page that states the day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington and a small clique within the CIA was responsible, he confided. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death, ruled a suicide. There's a lot of speculation around that. How much weight should we be giving it?
All right. This is something that had been out there before, but it's now in a very clean form, as you can see. It's unredacted. It's a very compelling story. Gary Underhill had been a consultant to the Central Intelligence Agency and military intelligence for a number of years. He was an expert in small arms warfare. All right. So he would be a consultant to third world rebellions and things like that. Very shortly after the assassination, he went up and visited some of his friends in New England. All right. And he started muttering these very strange things about the Kennedy assassination, you know, about they're a bunch of drug runners and criminals, referring everybody thought was to his former employment with the CIA, and that they had killed Kennedy. All right. And they asked him, they were leaving on a trip, and they asked him if he'd like to join them so they could console him. And he said no. Okay. He didn't want to go for whatever reason. Then a friend of his, a magazine writer, came knocking at his door a few months later, and he found his dead body, okay, with a gun lying nearby. And the problem was that the gun was in the wrong hand. Okay. All right. I believe it was that Underhill was left-handed, and the gun was found in his right hand. All right. And the friend was very, very disappointed in the investigation that came out afterwards. He said words to the effect that, you know, it's almost like they wanted to bungle the investigation. All right. That's how disappointed he was in what happened with the inquiry afterwards. Gary Underhill was one of the most interesting people that you will ever find in this case. Okay. And I'm really glad they declassified this memo in a clean form. All right. You won't find very many more compelling stories than the story of Gary Underhill.
So, what should we conclude? Is it too early? Are we going to see more conspiracies, or are we going to get really a clearer picture?
You know, I think that the mainstream media is trying to call this, before they even read this stuff, that it's not, that it's not important, etc. I think there are a lot of very interesting things in here, but you have to be like a gold miner, and you have to weed through this stuff that is not really important. And that takes a long time.
Mm.
All right. But let me give you one thing that I think is interesting. When Oswald went to Mexico, supposedly went to Mexico, James Angleton, the chief of the counterintelligence of the CIA, said that he had been in close association with a guy named Valery Kostakov, who was a KGB agent masquerading as a diplomat. And Angleton put that story out almost a day of the assassination. And he said that Kostakov was an agent of Department 13, which deals with, among other things, assassinations. So, of course, everybody then thought, well, they jumped on this thing that maybe Oswald was working for the Russians, when he shot Kennedy. Well, one of the declassified memos from 1971, a CIA memo, admits, wait a minute, we don't know if Kostakov worked for Department 13. That's an assumption that's not warranted by the evidence. So when I saw this jumped out at me and made me think, was Angleton trying to frame Oswald by jumping to that conclusion within 24 hours of JFK's murder? And if so, if that's true, what does that say about James Angleton? Now, short summary. James Angleton was, of course, the chief of counterintelligence for the Central Intelligence Agency for about 15 or 20 years on the day of the assassination. He was a rabid anti-communist, okay, who a lot of people think had almost gone off the edge, with his mania about the Soviet Union. So anybody like Kennedy, who was trying to forge a rapprochement with Fidel Castro in Cuba and a detente with Nikita Khrushchev in Russia, that would look very bad to somebody like Jim Angleton. So that's something that I think is very interesting that came out the first day.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Just before we wrap up, how important is it that these files have been made public? We've been waiting decades for them. There has been so many theories around the truth. How important is it for you?
I think that ultimately, when they're all out there, and I think there's going to be a third batch today, and everything has gone through and sifted, I think we're going to have a more accurate picture of what really happened to Kennedy. I really do believe that, you know, and I think, as they say, there'll be a much more accurate mosaic of what happened on November 22nd, 1963. I think we're getting a little bit of that slowly but surely, even within 24 hours of them being declassified. And let me say one last thing. I've only seen one document that has any redactions in it at all. So I think Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the DNI, okay, and Donald Trump deserve a lot of credit for
Mm.
fighting through the FBI, the CIA, State Department, NSA, etc., to get these out there in the purest form. I've really never seen anything like this before. The lack of redactions in these documents.
Absolutely. They deserve all the credit for this. James DiEugenio, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, good night.